What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Kyrogus, and today we're going to be doing a tier list of every single boss from the Dark Souls trilogy. In the past, I have done a tier list of all the bosses in Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, Dark Souls 2, but I've never ranked them all side by side. In the future, I'd like to do some kind of like official last place to first place ranking, and maybe I'll do that in the form of a bigger video at some point, but for now, let's just throw them all into a little itty bitty tier list. So I don't think we need much ado. Let's just get into it. We'll start with Dark Souls 1. And first up, we've got the Asylum Demon. Now, I've said before, I'm a big fan of the Asylum Demon. I think it is the absolute perfect tutorial boss and tutorial area for a Dark Souls game. You start up the game, and the first sentient enemy you fight against is this big boy right here. And at first, you have no weapon. He seems absolutely insurmountable. You've heard all of these horror stories about Dark Souls, like, man, I've heard this game is hard. Is this really what I'm expected to do? And then you realize, you explore a little bit, find another path, get some gear, not level up a bit, but train a bit on your skills. And then you come back into the fight with a plunge attack for a big chunk of damage, and you learn in that moment the fundamental rule of Dark Souls, which is every challenge may seem insurmountable at first encounter. But if you take the time to explore a little bit, train up a little bit, and maybe learn a new tactic, you'll find that everything is defeatable, and I think that is freaking awesome. Now, that being said, it's not the most, intricate boss fight. So, part of me wants to say A tier for the funsies. Wow, these are tall pictures. But I don't know if I can go higher than B tier, honestly. I want to go A tier, but I'll go B for now. We'll see how the rest stacks up. Maybe it'll get bumped up. We'll see. Man, Asylum. Lamau. Next up, we got Bell Gargoyles. Actually, one of my more favorite fights in Dark Souls 1. It's the first double boss fight you'll encounter in Dark Souls, and it's really freaking cool. I'm going to go A tier for Bell Gargoyles. A tier. It's one of the more, I feel like, involved boss fights, and that's really fun. Capra Demon. Capra Demon is sad because it's a boss that looks so cool, and on its own, I think it's a fine boss. Except for the fact that on its own, it is pretty easy. It would be one of, if not the easiest bosses, if it was on its own. What makes it difficult is it's in a tiny enclosed arena, and he has two dog minions with him that are really the entire boss fight. If you can defeat both of his dog minions and, recover yourself with a little bit of space to, regroup, recalibrate, the fight's pretty much over. And not only that, the boss is pretty freaking jank because of the small space and those dogs. So he's notoriously a pretty crap fight. For now, I gotta go D tier for Capra Demon. I love you for your design. You're super cool, but I gotta go D tier. Ceaseless Discharge. It's also D tier. It's not incredibly offensive. It's got scripted cheese, which is really cool, but that makes it, once you learn about that cheese, you're probably never gonna fight it the real way again, so it's not even really a boss fight, and fighting it normally is as simple as dodge his hand, and it'll sit there for 10 seconds to let you waylay on it. Not a great fight either way. It's D tier. Next up is Centipede Demon. Centipede Demon is a cooler, I feel like more thought out boss fight than Ceaseless Discharge, but I like it less because it's a pretty tedious fight. You have a very small amount of arena that you can stand on. It's a very big arena, one of the bigger boss arenas in the game, but you can only stand on 5% of it because of the freaking lava. You can get the ring if you chop off his arm and equip it mid-fight, but that's not something I feel like happens for most people. And it ends up just being a tedious fight where you just gotta kind of wailing on it from underneath. I don't know. I think it's also gotta kind of be D tier. I don't even want to put it in C because I enjoy it less than these other two, honestly. So it's gotta go D tier. Chaos Witch Quelaag. This is an iconic boss fight, an absolutely iconic boss fight, and I honestly think it's gotta go A tier. I'd probably even put it above Gargoyles. I think in a casual playthrough, I make somewhat generalizations in some of these statements. Everyone's experience with every Dark Souls game and every Dark Souls boss is a lot different. They're based on your play style. The way you experience a boss is going to be a lot different than it is for other people. For me, when I, in my first playthrough, got to Quelaag, she was by far and easily the clearly most difficult boss in the game up to that point. I'd fought, you know, Gargoyles, obviously Asylum and Taurus, Capra, Gaping. Quelaag was easily the most challenging for me. But she's also just a good fight. Amazing chest ahead, that too. Crossbreed Priscilla. She's alright. She's decent. She's an optional boss in a very cool area, one of the coolest areas in the game. She starts out the boss fight for like the first half of the fight being invisible, and you can only see her if you look at her footprints in the snow, or if you like somehow stick an arrow into her, it'll be like, you know, flying around. Other than that, it's a decent fight. She's got blood loss that she builds up with her scythe, which is pretty cool. And she's a pretty cool character. It's not anything crazy special, though. I gotta go B tier. I think the Asylum Demon is more iconic, so for that, I'd probably have Priscilla under the Asylum Demon. But she is a pretty good, decent boss fight. Now I've got Gwendolyn. I don't know, Gwendolyn. He's not as offensive as, like, the D tier bosses, but I don't know. I might bump Gwendolyn down to D later, but for now, I'll go C tier. I don't think it's offensive enough to be any less. Now we've got Sif, Great Grey Wolf Sif. Sif is another one of those iconic Dark Souls bosses. One of the most, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. One of the most, not immersive. I don't know. Her lore captivates you. She's got sad lore, and it makes you love the boss. And it's one of the few bosses in this game that you're probably the bad guy for killing. You're pretty much the bad guy for killing Sif or Priscilla. Honestly, Ceaseless Discharge, technically he does attack you. It's because you're defaming his sister's grave. Sif is just a great fight, though, when you're just talking about the mechanics. It's a fun fight. It's a cool fight. The character is cool. I think I gotta put it A tier. I don't know if I'd put it above Quelaag, but I love Gargoyles too, though. For now, I'll put it right above Gargs. But I mean, they're all grouped together in the tier. I'm not specifically ranking them necessarily within each tier. Seath the Scaleless has become, it sucks because it's the only like main game dragon boss. Well, I guess there's Gaping Dragon, but I love dragons. I think they're freaking cool. And especially in video games, my favorite bosses are almost always dragon bosses. And Seath the Scaleless freaking sucks, dude. The more I play Dark Souls, the longer I know Dark Souls, the less I like Seath the Scaleless. His lore is cool. His design is cool. His area is cool, but kind of frustrating. It's not that he's bad, but he's B-. He's B-. He's a frustrating fight. Four Kings. Back in the day, like in my first playthrough and shortly after subsequent playthroughs, Four Kings was one of my least favorite bosses. But after learning Hitless and learning how the fight works and dodging the attacks and being able to handle any situation, it actually became one of my favorite fights in the game. In casual playthroughs, it is kind of a DPS check. The way you typically have to beat it is just, can you do enough damage in a short amount of time before you get absolutely swarmed by kings? So it's definitely a boss that typically you want to save to later in the game if you can. But it's a really fun fight. Before, I would have put it in like C tier at best. Now it's like creeping up on A tier. I'll put it bottom of A tier for now, A-. Here we go, it's everyone's favorite, the big one, Bed of Chaos. I've said it before, I'll say it again, I will say it till the end of time for the rest of my days, till the day I die. It sucks! It freaking sucks, dude. It is, in my opinion, the worst boss ever put into a video game. It does have decently alright lore, but that is the only thing it has going for it. It looks stupid, it plays even stupider. It is the worst boss fight in video games. F tier, Bed of Chaos. Gaping Dragon is up next. Solid fight. It's got a huge, massive health bar for the beginning of the game. Or for early in the game, I should say. Not quite the beginning. It's got a very unique design. Again, it's a dragon, but it's not like a typical dragon boss, so it doesn't draw to me in that way. But it's a cool fight, and it is extremely memorable. It's technically an optional boss fight. Not if you're playing casually, but if you're playing, you know, with the master key and you've got knowledge of some shortcuts and stuff, it's technically an optional boss. So in that sense, if you're not fighting it much in replay, it can kind of become a little forgettable just because you don't go to that area much anymore. but it is one of the most unique designs, and in my opinion, one of the least forgettable bosses. That being said, I mean, honestly, I think it's a better boss fight than Seath. I'm gonna have to put Seath down to C tier, and I'm gonna let Gaping Dragon go to the bottom of B tier. Honestly, I'm gonna have it above Priscilla. I think it's a more unique fight than Priscilla. Priscilla is a fine fight, but I'm gonna have Gaping Dragon a step above. But if Cass was legit the best boss in any Souls game, what are you smoking? Hey, everyone's entitled to their opinion, Tony. I have heard some wild takes in my stream, some even recently, and so yeah, everyone's entitled to their opinion. How you doing tonight, man? Pinwheel, the boss that is clowned as the easiest boss in the entire game. And that's because it is a boss with an early game health bar placed in what for most all people is the late game. If you can go fight it early, which some people do in their subsequent playthroughs, but even then, it's really not that difficult. It's much more difficult, but not that difficult. It's got alright lore, and I don't think there's anything wrong with having an easy boss now and then, but because it doesn't stand out as a challenging fight, it's not going to stand out as one of the better ones. It's less frustrating than Seath because it's not very frustrating at all. It's not offensive enough to be D tier, but I don't think it would be higher than C just because it's almost a nothing burger of a fight. Seath's lore and importance is so much higher than Pinwheel's. It'd be pretty freaking disrespectful to put Pinwheel above Seath. But I'll put Pinwheel right there in C tier. Chilling, finishing up side stuff on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Nice. Gamer Night, which boss were you saying is F tier? Are you talking about Pinwheel? If we're talking about challenge, then sure, fair enough. Gravelord Nito. I actually high-key like Nito. I think he's got one of the coolest designs of any boss. His lore is cool. His freaking area is cool. The only thing I don't like about Nito is that a lot of the challenge of his boss fight is enemy spam. If you move in that boss fight, you're going to get swarmed with skeletons. If you run around the whole arena, you're going to get swarmed with giant skeletons. They even nerfed the enemy spam a little bit because I think in the original versions of the game, not the final release version, but in development, I think they plan to have a section of normal skeletons, a section of the big skeletons, and then even a section of skeleton dogs, and they realized that was a bit much and took it out. But then when you do it with hitless strats or just strats where you don't want to deal with the skeletons, and you fight Nito 1v1, he's pretty mindless. He's so slow. He does big damage, but you can evade everything while yawning with an eye closed because he's so slow. But I still really like him. I still think he's B tier. I would have him, at least there. At least there. I think he's a solid B tier boss. Nito is cool. I agree. Pinwheel, you'd have an F. Iron Golem. I feel like this is another boss that maybe doesn't get enough love. I think it's really freaking cool. I think he's the perfect, boss to have at the top of the Sin's Fortress. Just a tough, high defense, hard-hitting, just made of metal boss at the top of this giant, looming stone fortress. Very solid boss. Definitely, I could see people putting him in C tier, but I'm gonna go B tier. It's kind of right on that Gaping Dragon level for me. Now we're getting to the good stuff. Black Dragon Calamite. I've said it before, there are two bosses that contend for my favorite bosses in Dark Souls 1, one of which being Black Dragon Calamite. I've already said in this tier list a couple of times, what I absolutely love most in a boss fight, or at least the archetype of a boss fight that I love most, I just love dragon fights. I also love, swordsman fights against, your player being a swordsman against another swordsman that's bigger and more menacing. That's freaking cool. Almost like a Jedi lightsaber fight or something like that. But it's between that and it's between dragons. And Black Dragon Calamite is the only classic dragon boss fight in Dark Souls 1. And not only that, he's a freaking awesome fight. He looks cool. He's tough. He's challenging. He's, in my opinion, easily a top 3 most difficult boss in the game. And he's just freaking cool. And he's S tier for me. We're getting crazy though, because my other favorite boss in Dark Souls 1, I go back and forth so much on which one is actually my favorite, Artorias the Abyss Walker. Artorias, in my opinion, has the absolute peak of Dark Souls lore. His lore, to me, is just the coolest lore of any character in the franchise, I guess. I've got a freaking figurine of Artorias on my desk over there. I've got the Dark Souls handbook that has him on the cover. He was the cover of the DLC. Just one of the coolest characters. Not only that, his boss fight is fun. The only thing that honestly I kind of have against Artorias, some people struggle on him hard, so I might get some flack for this. I think he's too easy. I think he's too easy of a fight. All of his attacks are pretty telegraphed and not difficult to dodge. And it is a very fun dance. Like, you're not going to melt him in 2 seconds like some other bosses. But you're not going to sweat through that fight much once you learn it decently. Calamite and Manus, even when you know those fights to a T, can stress you out. Artorias doesn't really do that. So he loses a little bit of the luster when he's not as challenging, but that's not the experience for everybody. Either way, he's a top 2 boss in the game for me, and I've got him definitely in S tier. Next is tough. We've got Manus. Manus is, in my opinion, and again, everyone struggles with different things. In my opinion, Manus is the most difficult, most challenging boss in Dark Souls 1. And he's freaking cool. He's a giant darkness monster. But, and again, everyone struggles on different stuff. I know people who didn't struggle with Manus at all. It's based on your build, your play style. But he's a good freaking fight. He is either S tier or top of A tier, and I don't really know what I'm going to do. Because for me personally, like, it's Calamite, it's Artorias top 2. Third is like, I don't know, maybe Ornstein and Smo. There's a considerable jump. Is Manus qualified for S tier? I'm going to say yes for now. He's definitely a way above Quelaag. So I'm going to say Manus is S tier for now, but considerably a bit lower than these two. First, maybe 2 attempts trying to learn his tails are a pain, but after that, I agree he's too easy. Yeah, I'm glad you agree, Tony. Artorias, yeah, I know a lot of people who really struggle on Artorias. Even I kind of struggled on him quite a bit my first playthrough. But the second you learn his fight, it's not all fights are like this. You can learn a fight. Like, I've learned Calamite or Manus in the past to where they got easy for a time, but then when you come back to it later, like, they are tough again. If you've, like, you know, forgotten some of it. Artorias' fight is like riding a bike. When you learn it the first time, you don't really forget. I could not fight Artorias for like a year or 2 and come back and probably beat him on the first try. Like, it's just that kind of boss. Once you learn it, you don't really unlearn it, because it's the kind of thing that you don't really forget or need much, like, reaction speed for. Moonlight Butterfly. Notoriously the boss that killed me the most in my first playthrough of Dark Souls 1, even though it's considered by most to be one of the easier bosses in the game. If you ask me, on my first playthrough, it was objectively the most challenging. It is not a good boss. It's a pretty gimmicky range boss fight, or you have to wait 10 minutes to get a few swings in while it perches against the wall. It's a very beautiful boss. I played it my first or second night playing the game, and it was very cool, like, just a very cool ambiance and vibe with the boss, but it's not a great boss fight. It's certainly D tier. I'd probably have it right around Ceaseless, probably. Ceaseless actually has cool lore. Moonlight Butterfly, there's literally no lore to it other than Seed created it, and for some reason it doesn't live in the Crystal Cave with all its other butterflies. It moved to the forest for some reason. That's the lore. That's the butterfly lore. So it's a nothing burger of lore. It's a gimmicky fight. It's optional. It's not very difficult unless you're me. And so yeah, it's a D tier boss. Here's a tip for Moonlight Butterfly. If you want to kill the boss faster, use the bug spray resin. Well, there's a tip apparently. Bug spray resin. Dark Souls 1. I can't even picture that. Oh, we've got a classic, baby. Ornstein and Smo. I told you I think Manus is probably the most difficult boss, generally speaking, in Dark Souls 1. The next one I would say is Ornstein and Smo. Now, you know, I can better express what I mean by everyone's experience is different. Because on my first playthrough of Dark Souls, I really didn't struggle with Ornstein and Smo. I think I beat them on my 3rd attempt. But they are one of the most menacing and threatening forces in Dark Souls 1. And then when you do hit lists like I did, they were the bane of my existence. And practically the whole run came down to whether or not I could beat them. I do like them more than Manus. I think Ornstein and Smo are my 3rd favorite boss in Dark Souls 1. They are iconic. They're the right smack dab halfway point of the game. And in the base game, I think the biggest challenge as far as bosses go. They are iconic. They're a mega double boss where each boss on its own would be a legitimate, fully capable boss fight. Except Ornstein's health bar is really small. But Super Ornstein, if you want to go that way, like if it was each a 2-stage fight where you had to fight their first phase and their second phase, that is a more than solid boss fight on their own, except you gotta fight them together. And you've got one big, slower, massively hard-hitting dude, and one fast, freaking freak of nature in Ornstein. They complement each other perfectly with their fighting styles, making for, in my opinion, one of the most iconic boss fights of all time. Next up is the final boss of Dark Souls 1. We've got Gwyn, Lord of Cinder. And this is pretty sad, because as cool as I think Gwyn is, I don't want to put him below Four Kings. Four Kings A tier is a little high. I'm going to go B plus Four Kings, but Gwyn is under. The problem with Gwyn, if you fight him without parrying, he's a freaking hard boss. He is the fastest boss in the game. There essentially are no healing windows. The only way you can heal against Gwyn is if you, I don't know if it's technically cheese, but a strat where you like have to pin him against the pillars in the boss arena, so he'll get stuck for a second to give you a chance to heal. Other than that, he is all speed all the time. But once you do learn that you can parry him and are willing to do it, you can dominate him. And in certain circumstances, you can literally two-shot him. Two-shotting the final boss of a game that's considered to be very difficult is kind of sad. I have heard people say, like, oh, it's like a thematic thing that you get to the final boss and this game that's been so difficult, the final boss is actually really easy because he's this like withered old man. I don't think it's that deep, honestly. I don't think he was intended to be as easy as he can be. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but how fast and menacing he is if you don't parry him, like he's freaking tough and he feels like a last boss of the game. But his health bar is relatively smaller and he can be absolutely dominated in a pretty lackluster way, making him a little bit of a disappointing fight. I think his character is perfect. He's a perfect character to be the last boss. But he like Artorias, I keep talking about Artorias is, you know, a little too easy. Even if Gwyn was just on Artorias' level, I think it'd be perfect. But he's just not. So he's got to be B tier for me. Excellent lore and even still a cool fight, but doesn't quite fit the spectacle of the final boss of Dark Souls for me. Pling pling plong. Next up, we got Demon Fire Sage and the Stray Demon. I'll kind of talk about these simultaneously. They are hated on because they're copy and paste bosses of each other and kind of the Asylum Demon. The Asylum Demon doesn't have magic, so the Asylum Demon is honestly a different boss fight. Just has the same like model design, but his moveset and weapon is different. Whereas Demon Fire Sage and Stray Demon are literally identical, except Demon Fire Sage is fire. So here's what I'm going to say. Stray Demon, very average C tier boss. It doesn't have the iconic, you know, tutorial section. First Dark Souls boss like Asylum Demon. Doesn't really teach you anything. You just kind of go back to the Asylum and fight another Asylum Demon. C tier. Demon Fire Sage. Some people think this is the worst one of the three. I'm going B tier. In fact, I'm going B tier between Gaping and Nito. Here's why. A, he's fire, which is freaking cool. Fire makes everything cooler. At least for me it does. It looks like a Balrog. B, in my very first playthrough, I had an iconic moment in Chironia history. One of the most like memorable, significant moments of my early streaming career, where a lot of people like wagered an attempt for me to beat Fire Sage, and they were gonna like, you know, donate money or whatever. And I have been struggling so hard on this boss, and I actually beat it on that attempt. And that forever memory will always make me love Fire Sage. We got an oof from Gamer Knight. I don't think he agrees with the B tier Demon Fire Sage, but I'm not gonna apologize. I'm keeping him there. I will say though, Demon Fire Sage is a stupid freaking name. Why? He's a Demon Fire Sage. That makes me think of like a fire wizard, you know, a warlock or something, not a giant Asylum Demon. Yeah, he does like fire spells, kind of. But I think they even do like magic damage, not even fire damage. I don't know, man. But, yeah, I'm putting him a B tier. Not gonna apologize. Sanctuary Guardian, the first boss of the DLC. If you fight the DLC after you've beaten most of the base game, Sanctuary Guardian is going to feel very easy because his health bar is pretty small in comparison to late game bosses. I have not ever really given Sanctuary Guardian much of a fight. Like, I've never really attempted hitless of him, but holy moly, he is fast and hard to evade. So he's a lot tougher than he's given credit for, because in a casual playthrough, you're usually going to fight him by the time you're a little bit over leveled for him. But either way, he's a solid fight. Certainly B tier. I'd kind of put him in this range, right about here. Upper B tier, the way we've been going so far. But yeah, Not anything crazy awesome, but I put him there. Next is Taurus Demon, a solid early game boss. Get to fight him in a really cool arena on the top of a castle wall with the beautiful sun over you. But a pretty solid fight. I actually really like Taurus. Nothing crazy. I don't know if I could be as nice to put him in B tier. In fact, I almost think I should drop a couple of these bosses. I'm gonna go top of C tier for now. I'll go top of C tier for now. He beats out Stray Demon for being, you know, a unique boss. Even though you can fight him later as a normal enemy. And that is all for Dark Souls 1, actually. Huh. That's kind of crazy. I don't know if this is exactly how I thought it would shape out. I knew my S tier 4. And other than that, like I knew my S tier 4, I knew my F tier, and probably my D tier. After that, I'm a little bit shocked at some of this. Maybe not shocked. I am going to readjust a little bit here. We are going to readjust a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and move Gwendolyn and Pinwheel down to D. I'm sorry, Pinwheel. I've got to. And I'm going to move Priscilla down to C tier. And I'll move Fire Sage down a little bit for the copy paste. And we'll leave it at that. I think I'm feeling pretty good about that for Dark Souls 1. We've got 2 more games to go. Dark Souls 2 is going to be the longer list, but I also have probably less to say about a lot of stuff. So we're going to move on. But this is Dark Souls 1. Let's keep it going. Ava the King's Pet. It's a fine fight. It's a very cool looking enemy. One of those invisible tiger things that's in the final DLC. It's a solid enough fight. I'd probably say it's B tier. We'll go right there for now. Aldia, Scholar of the First Sin. Holy frick, F tier. It is the worst boss in Dark Souls 2 in my opinion. You have to grind like crazy to get this secret final boss of the game just for it to be this freaking bullcrap burning tree that sits there looking like freaking Jabba the Hutt, a giant slug of a burning tree that you can't even walk up and whack because he's got constant fire flaming under his body. It's freaking bullcrap. It's not as bad as Bed of Chaos, but it's F tier. Screw that thing. Ancient Dragon. Ginormous gargantuan elf bar. You know how I feel about my dragon fights. I love them. This boss was actually really tough and kind of frustrating for me in my playthrough of Dark Souls 2, but a very cool freaking boss, and I really like it. I'm going to go A tier. It was one of my more appreciated bosses of Dark Souls 2, and I'm going to go like there. Type on, but I'm not sure what you're saying there, Gamer Knight. Dark Lurker was one of my favorite bosses in Dark Souls 2. Freaking cool boss. Looks like a Nazgul. Looks like that freaking Ringwraith boss fight thing from Kingdom Hearts 1, that secret boss. Really enjoyed Dark Lurker. I think it was like my second favorite boss of Dark Souls 2, if I'm not mistaken. We'll go through and look at the others, but I'm going to go S tier for Dark Lurker. In fact, for kicks and giggles, I'm going to put it above Manus. Of the Darkness bosses, I'm going to hand it to Dark Lurker because I'm just like that. You liked him a lot. Which one did you like? Ancient Dragon? Is that who you were talking about? Or are you talking about Aldia? Ancient Dragon? Yeah, I like Ancient Dragon as well. I got an A tier. Dragon Rider. This is the... I think it was the first boss in Dark Souls 2 that I fought and beat. I think the intended first boss is the last giant, but I think I fought Dragon Rider first. Either way, it's not a tough fight, except its arena is freaking tiny, and you can very easily fall off or get hit off. You're supposed to pull these switches that, like, fill out the ground in the boss arena, and if you do that, the fight is pretty easy. He's just like a big enemy. Solid enough, but nothing crazy. I'll go bottom of C tier. He's anything wrong with him. Twin Dragon Riders. The exact same as Dragon Rider, but a double fight. There's no way to fall off in this arena, but it is a double boss, which just makes it, you know, a little bit more in depth of a fight. So for that, I'm going to say it's better. Do I want to go B tier? I feel like it's a little generous, but we'll put bottom of B tier for now. Why not? One thing you hated about Ancient Dragon was the run back. I can see that. I think you can run by and dodge everything a little bit okay, but yeah, if you do fight the enemies or get caught by any of the enemies, they are freaking tough between the bonfire and dragon, Ancient Dragon. Alana the Squalid Queen. Why am I not recognizing that picture? Why am I not recognizing that picture? That makes me think of like that snake boss in the poison, but is that what that boss is? Because that picture does not look anything like that boss, and it's got me questioning. He was a DLC. Oh, I know. Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about. Yes. She was like very similar to Nashandra. Maybe not, but she like summoned like some of the like big knights to fight with her. She was solid enough. I'd say probably better than Twin Dragon Riders. Maybe even better than Ava. I don't know. We'll go B tier. Like there. Yeah. She's solid enough from my memory. I didn't struggle too hard on her. She was tough enough, but I didn't struggle too hard. Flexile Sentry, it's a whatever boss. It's like those freaking frog dudes that are like conjoined twins, front and back, and slash away. They're a C tier fight. I can't say much more for them. They're somewhat memorable because they're in like the bottom of that pirate ship, which is kind of cool. But at the same time, I say they're kind of memorable. I feel like for a lot of people, they might be like not memorable. I'll put them right there, kind of mid C tier. It's like the definition of a mid boss fight, if you're asking me. Demon of Song. The fight's kind of annoying, but it is extremely memorable. One of the most memorable boss fights in Dark Souls 2, in my opinion. It is a giant skull in the mouth of a ginormous frog. And it's kind of a tough fight, but it's in a very beautiful arena and very memorable design. The fight itself isn't amazing. I'm gonna go... I could be nice enough to give it B-, but it's like right on that B-, C+ line. For now, I'll go C+. We'll see what happens. The Duke's Deer Freya. For a giant spider boss fight, which it's another trope, kind of like dragons, that I love in my fantasy boss fights. For a giant spider boss fight, it kind of freaking sucks. It's almost more like fighting like a robot or something, because it like hovers in the middle of the arena. I don't know. It feels much less like a fight and more like you're fighting a giant machine or something. So it makes it a lot less cool. It's not offensive enough, at least for now, that I put it D tier, but it's bottom of C tier. Gank Squad. They're officially listed as the Gank Squad. This is one of the DLC bosses where you're essentially fighting just 3 like player level NPC enemies simultaneously. One of them is like Havel, one of them is an archer, one of them is like I don't even remember what the third one is, honestly. I think it's just like a normal knight, maybe. It is a triple boss. Not too many of those. There's some double bosses, lots of solo bosses, not too many triple bosses. But as triple bosses go, I honestly can't think of a triple boss currently that does it extremely well. I don't know if I like this one that much. It's kind of cheese. It's C-. I think it's more fun to fight than Freya. We'll just go C tier. I'm sure all of these qualify as super bosses. LOL. Shout out to my old Elden Ring YouTube Shorts comments. I'll explain that story very quickly. In Elden Ring, you defeat a boss, it says enemy felled, or great enemy felled, or like, you know, whatever the big stuff is. So when I was first playing the game, I started making YouTube Shorts out of like my boss attempts after my first night of playing. And I fought only enemy felled for every boss, except I beat Margit at the end of my first night of playing the Elden Ring. And when you beat Margit, it says great enemy failed. So I was like, oh, he's one of like the main super bosses of the game. So I put in my Margit title of my YouTube short when I was fighting him, super boss. Problem is, so I decided, okay, the ones that say great enemy mean super boss. So any boss for the rest of Elden Ring that said great enemy, I put super boss on. And a lot of the bosses that say great enemy are not necessarily super bosses. In fact, most of them aren't. It's just kind of like a big boss. So some very easy bosses on my YouTube shorts for Elden Ring, I put the title super boss in there and got clowned in the comments. Even though I've very well figured out by like night 3 of Elden Ring, oh, that's not what that means. But I was like, you know what? I started a shtick and we're getting engagement with these comments. So let's just keep it going, baby. There's your super boss story. Belfry Gargoyles, not carbon, but a knockoff copy of Bell Gargoyles that doesn't do it as good. It's fine. It's C tier. It's okay. I think I fought them late in my Dark Souls 2 playthrough. I had to go back and find them, so I was a little over leveled, I think, probably for them, but they were fine. They're cool. Nice little callback boss. Giant Lord. Man, there's a lot of bosses in Dark Souls 2. And a lot of them aren't like the worst thing ever, but a lot of them are just kind of mid. I think the Giant Lord is supposed to be the, like, earlier in time prime version of the last giant, or just maybe if they're not the same character, just a different giant. I think they're supposed to be implied to be the same character, though. So I'm going to rank them both right now. Giant Lord is obviously a later game, tougher boss. It can be B tier. Why not? Why not? Last Giant can be C tier. That's fine. It's fine. It's whatever. Guardian Dragon. You know how I feel about my boss fights. It is a classic Red Dragon boss fight. Problem is, you fight it in this, like, dome. Like in a freaking observatory looking thing. Like that freaking observatory from, like, Megamind. That's like the boss arena for Guardian Dragon. So kind of weird. It's in a pretty cool area, and it is the gateway, like, opening to a very cool area of Dark Souls 2. And it's a solid fight. It's a solid B tier fight. I'm honestly gonna go. Wow. I'm gonna go high up in B tier and put it right there. Right there. On a good day, I might even have it above 4 Kings. Who knows? Burnt Ivory King. I think Burnt Ivory King has to be my favorite boss from Dark Souls 2. It is easily the coolest arena. You enter the boss fight falling from the sky, not from the sky, but falling from way up down into this freaking, like, Mustafar freaking nether hellish location where you're, like, on this little platform surrounded by lava with a giant gate in the back. And the boss fight starts with you and some of the, like, Ivory Knights or whatever. I don't know if that's what they're called. Fighting alongside you as you fight. It's like you and a bunch of Silver Knights versus a bunch of Black Knights, essentially, if you wanted to put it in, like, Dark Souls 1 terms. And you fight off some of those, and then when you defeat them, those gates open, and out comes the Burnt Ivory King, and he is tough, and he is freaking cool, and he's the final DLC boss of Dark Souls 2, and in my opinion was my favorite boss of the game. Over Dark Lurker, I don't think I can justify putting him above a boss as iconic as Ornstein and Smo, but Burnt Ivory King is a freaking incredible boss fight. I really like him. Covetous Demon. This is the actual Job of the Hut boss fight. It's clowned on, but I think it's so goofy that it's lovable. I'm not going to put it in D tier, but it is a pretty nothing burger of a fight. I mean, it's more lovable than Gang Squad, so we're going right there. Looking Glass Knight. A very solid entry in the Dark Souls 2 lineup of bosses. Pretty cool boss arena. It is the boss of one of, if not my favorite area of Dark Souls 2 in the Drangleic Castle. Very cool. Very cool boss. Well, not super cool, but very solid enough boss that I'd put it like here. B boss. Lost Sinner. It's another one of those bosses that's solid. It's not like offensive. It doesn't do anything bad. It's just kind of a. It's the kind of the problem with Dark Souls 2 is there's a lot of bosses, so a lot of them are just kind of average boss fights. Lost Sinner, I think, is one of those. It's a C+ fight, if anything. There. Lud and Zolin, the King's Pets. It is a double boss fight of the Ava boss, except you've got to go through. I keep saying Bed of Chaos is the worst boss in video game history. The Frigid Outskirts are one of, if not the worst areas in video game history, and the boss at the end of that is a double boss against 2 freaking saber-tooth tigers. On its own, this boss fight would be very cool, but the fact that you have to run back through the worst area in video game history every time you fight them makes it suck, and it's not even like a unique epic boss. There's no reward really for killing them. You just kind of kill them and get warped back. So you don't really get a reward, and it's not a unique boss because it's just a copy and paste of an earlier boss fight as a double boss fight, and there's the worst area in the game for that. I'm sorry, Lud and Zolin. On your own, you're kind of cool. You're very memorable, I gotta say that. But you are a D- fight. Not quite offensive enough to be F tier. Your area is F tier. But it's cool enough and memorable enough to barely get a step up. But all those negative factors, I can't put you above D tier. I'm sorry. Prowling Magus and the Congregation. This boss is like better than Deacons of the Deep, but it's like almost the same concept. Not quite. Not quite. I mean, they're functionally different, but it's like you've got one like priest dude boss and then a bunch of enemy spam the rest of the boss. So in that way, they're related. I really don't like this boss. I honestly like it less than Lud and Zolin, but it's not nearly as offensive. It's one of those easier boss fights that you can kind of melt in 2 seconds. So because of that, I'm going to put it above, but it's certainly D tier. I'll put it like, honestly, below Moonlight. I'll put it right there. Mitha, sorry, the Baneful Queen. This is the snake lady I was talking about. It's another one of those average boss fights. It has like She has like a poison arena, which is really freaking annoying if you don't know how to drain the poison, which it's not extremely intuitive how you drain the poison. You gotta like burn this freaking windmill outside. A, why would that drain the poison? B, it doesn't even tell you that you can drain the poison, so it's kind of, what are we talking about? So she's fine. Another one of those Dark Souls 2, we have a lot of bosses, so a lot of them are inevitably C tier bosses. I'll go right below Taurus. Nashandra, the final boss of the base game in Dark Souls 2. So it's kind of like, by nature, gonna kind of compare her to Gwen. Nashandra's a very cool boss fight. Lore-wise, she is the daughter of Manus, so that's freaking cool. But she's kind of just an fight. She's alright. She's definitely B tier. She's not worse than that. Some people think I give Asylum Demon too much credit, but for all the reasons I stated earlier, I think it is such a great fight for those reasons. Nashandra, you can't like absolutely dominate to my knowledge like you can Gwen, but she's just kind of an average boss fight. It's kind of another one of those average boss fights for the final boss of the game. A lot of the other Souls games that I've played don't do that, but Dark Souls 1 and 2 kind of do. Yeah, I'm gonna put Nashandra right there in B tier. Old Iron King. I said Demon Fire Sage is kind of like the Balrog. Old Iron King is actually just a Balrog. It is a giant demon, dragon-looking almost thing that comes out of the lava. Problem is, it's kind of like a gimmicky boss fight. He kind of just perches up on the wall out of the lava and slaps at you. Almost like Ceaseless Discharge, I hate to say. He's definitely cooler looking in a cooler area and more involved than Ceaseless, but he's also kind of Garbo. I am going to put him in B tier. B tier is getting big now. For the sake of him being not a copy and paste, he's above Fire Sage, but below Ava. And I am going to move Giant Lord and Dragon Rider down to C tier. It makes sense that C tier, if that's going to be like the average grade, it makes sense that that's going to be our most filled slot. Old Dragon Slayer, ladies and gentlemen, it's our boy Ornstein from the Dark Souls 1 Ornstein Small boss fight. He lived and he's back as a solo boss fight in Dark Souls 2. I said each of these bosses from Dark Souls 1 on their own could have been a very solid boss fight as a solo boss. Well, in Dark Souls 2, Ornstein actually is a solo boss, and he's not as difficult, honestly, because he's older, so he's kind of an old man. He's much slower than he is in Dark Souls 1, but he's still freaking cool, freaking awesome. Just from lore and callbacks alone, one of my favorite bosses in Dark Souls 2. I can't put him above B tier. He's just another one of those kind of average boss fights in Dark Souls 2. It's the lore and the callback to Dark Souls 1 that makes him cool. I'll put him top of B tier though. I like him more than Four Kings enough. But I can't put him in A tier. I can't justify that. Ornstein's lost nephew. Yeah, there is some debate on whether or not he is actually Ornstein. There's debate on whether or not this is actually Ornstein. There's a lot of debate on if the Ornsteins in Dark Souls were ever actually Ornstein. Maybe the real Ornsteins were the Smoes we made along the way. But I like to believe it's the actual Ornstein. Executioner Chariot. This is a gimmick boss, but one of the more fun gimmick bosses in the Souls games. You're in kind of this like track arena where you're kind of like running and trying not to get smashed by the Executioner Chariot. It's kind of fun, but it's not really a boss fight as much as it's just a gimmick. But there are much worse gimmick boss fights out there, but I can't go higher than C tier. For a boss like this probably, so I'm gonna go there is fine for now. Actually, we'll go above Dragon Rider. We'll go there for now. The Pursuer. Very cool looking boss fight. He's just kind of like a giant knight, but he kind of flies. He's cool. He's one of the early bosses in Dark Souls 2. He's pretty cool. He's better than a lot of the average boss fights. I'll go bottom of B tier. B minus. Why not? Yeah, I'll probably leave you under Fire Sage, though. Sorry about it. Fume Knight. Now, Fume Knight is, I think, most people's favorite Dark Souls 2 boss is Fume Knight. And it's a great boss. I have nothing negative to say about it. I don't know if I could say... I mean, I definitely like Dark Lurker and Ivory King more. But I'll put it above Ancient Dragon. and Sif. I'll put it A+. It's top of A tier. I'll put it above Quelaag. Fume Knight is a very, very great fight. I think, like, functionally, it's a better fight probably than Dark Lurker. It's a great fight. Maybe it'll end up bumping up. We'll see how flooded the rest of these tiers get. But for now, it's A+, but it could bump up to the bottom of S, depending on how the rest of this goes. But it's right there on that line from A to S for me. Old Fume Knight. He was your hardest fight in the game. That's the other thing. I heard he was one of the hardest fights in the game. I struggled a lot on some Dark Souls 2 bosses, but Fume Knight was not one of them. And that goes back to everyone struggles on different things. Everyone struggles on different things. I did not struggle on Fume Knight. A lot of people do. I did not struggle on Orange Sea and Smo. At least in my freaking casual playthrough, I didn't hitless. A lot of people do struggle on Orange Sea and Smo. I struggled on Moonlight Butterfly more than anything else in Dark Souls 1. And for most people, it's one of the top 3 easiest bosses in the game. Everyone experiences this game differently, and I think you can make general statements on what is objectively likely to be the most difficult boss for people, but everyone has their own experiences. I think Manus is the hardest boss in Dark Souls 1. I didn't struggle on him too bad, but I think he's tough. My little brother beat him on literally his first attempt with a tank build, so it is what it is. Royal Rat Vanguard. First of all, this freaking picture they chose is maybe the ugliest thing I've ever seen. I do not like the rat fights in Dark Souls 2. Royal Rat Vanguard. I get confused. One of them is the giant dog, which is like Sif without a sword. One of them is the just normal rat that summons a lot of other rats. Both of them are pretty bad. Honestly. I think the Vanguard is the one that's just a bunch of rats, and that's D tier. That's D tier to the point that it's like there. And then Authority is okay, but it also sucks. C-. I won't go D tier because it's not as stupidly offensive of a fight, but it's not good. Ruined Sentinels. This is one of the other, if not the only other that I can think of, triple bosses in the Dark Souls trilogy. And it's It's 3 of the same enemy. They've got different names, but they're these like just stiff kind of knight robot things, honestly. Ruined Sentinels. They're It's a triple boss, so for that, it's like kind of unique and cool. But that's like the only positive for it. Other than that, it's just kind of a nothing boss. I'll put it like there. Royal is the big guy. But they're both royal. Authority is the big guy. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so I got those correct. Scorpionus Najka. Dark Souls 2 version of Chaos Witch Quelaag. Not as iconic, and I don't think as good, but also... but still very solid. I have it in B tier. She's probably around the Ava level. I'm gonna bump some of these down a little bit, give Dark Souls 2 a little bit more love. We'll go Ava here and Najka there. Oh, Sin, the Slumbering Dragon. Another classic dragon boss. I am a sucker for those, and I really like Sin, the Slumbering Dragon. It's A tier for me. I don't think I can quite go S tier with it. But it's right there with Fume Knight for me. I'd probably give Fume Knight the edge, but Sin is a great dragon boss fight. It's kind of like Dark Souls 2's version of Calamite, if we're going to try to compare him like that. Sin's a great dragon boss fight. Very cool. It's definitely a better fight than Ancient Dragon, who also is another classic dragon fight in A tier. I think Sin is definitely better, but I don't know if it's quite S tier good, but it might actually be. You know, if we decide we're going to start rearranging and bump stuff up, there's a pretty clear distinction, I think, between Fume Knight and Sin and Chaos Witch Quelaag. So if we're gonna end up bumping stuff, Fume Knight and Sin are right alongside each other for me, and they could both get bumped to S tier. Sir Alone, he is like a samurai warrior boss in the DLC. Very good fight. Very good fight. In fact, he's definitely A tier. And now that I'm looking at the scope of this A tier, ooh, it's getting tough. I'm gonna bump Gargoyles above Ancient Dragon, because Ancient Dragon is a little stiff of a fight. Sir Alon. I'm a sucker for dragon fights. And Ancient Dragon is like one of the most memorable bosses in Dark Souls 2 for me. Just the location that he's at, his area, his size, his spectacle is so memorable. Alon is okay. He's pretty good. He's definitely an A tier fight. Like, I'm not gonna go... He's a better fight than you know, old Ornstein. But, I mean, he's probably, like, objectively a better fight than Ancient Dragon. But, I mean, they're both an A tier, so it's not a huge distinction. These aren't exactly ranked in order. I kind of try to do that generally, but I'm not, like, sticking to this as gospel of how I'd rank them best to worst. I'll put him a step below Ancient Dragon because of my personal reasons, but he's probably objectively better. Next, we've got Skeleton Lords. This is kind of a Garbo boss. It sucks because skeletons are another one of those enemy tropes that I think are really cool and I like. Except with Skeleton Lords, it's just kind of an army of skeletons, but it's also not difficult. It's just kind of weird. We might start splitting stuff up again because C tier is kind of getting crowded, and there's kind of a split between what I think is C tier and what I think might be D worthy. Skeleton Lords, I will give this to them, have one of my favorite boss themes in Dark Souls 2. The Skeleton Lords boss theme is freaking cool. And I do like them better than, I'll put it like there. Covetous Demon is kind of cute and cuddly in a gross sort of way, so I like it. But I'll put Skeleton Lords right there. Blue Smelter Demon and Smelter Demon. They're the exact same boss fight. Copy and paste, except I think they're both very hard. Blue Smelter Demon is like insanely hard. It's in the DLC where Smelter Demon is kind of like a mid-game boss fight in the base game. The Blue Smelter Demon is a copy and paste, but it's blue fire, which means it's hotter and better and more challenging. And holy frick is it more challenging. I struggled on both versions. Blue Kool-Aid. I struggled on both versions of this boss fight. It's rare that I learn a boss fight and then a copy and pasted version is like way more difficult. But that's what happened. I learned Smelter Demon and it was a challenge. Then I got to Blue Smelter Demon way later in the game and it was somehow way harder. Neither of them are great, but they're memorable enough. They're probably C+, both of them. Honestly, I'm going to say normal Smelter Demon is probably better. And I'm gonna put both of them because they're the same boss, except this one is just more damage, late game, more difficult. But I'll put them both C+. Yeah, fair enough. The Rotten. It's another one of those C tier bosses. And what makes me like it less, the way Dark Souls 2 works is you can refight enemies and bosses using a specific item that like makes them a New Game Plus level harder. So you can essentially respawn enemies and bosses, but they'll be way harder. The Rotten is easy enough that the like pro strategy for like hitlessing Dark Souls 2, because you can progress the game based on the amount of souls gathered. So you can skip like a huge chunk of Dark Souls 2. And that's what a lot of people in Hitless do by respawning this boss over and over again and killing it over and over again and like unlocking the second half of the game without having to do a lot of the other bosses. I think that's really cringe. And the fact that the Rotten is the boss that's usually done with because it's not like difficult enough, it's just kind of freaking lame to me, honestly. And that makes me really not like it. It's a better, cooler boss than like these probably, but man, I don't like that that's kind of the scope of Dark Souls 2. Maybe I'm crazy, but if I ever do like a challenge run of Dark Souls 2, I feel like I won't want to do that strat and I want to just play through the game normally because it feels like cheating the game almost in a way to me. I don't know. Maybe that's a small brain take. Throne Watcher and Throne Defender. This is like an attempt at a similar vibe to Ornstein and Smell, except it's a late game. The boss right before you fight the base game final boss Nashandra in the same arena. It's a fine enough fight. It's B tier. It's not bad. I'd put it above Old Iron King. I don't think it's as... I like Iron Golem. I know a lot of people don't like Iron Golem or think he's a mad boss, but I actually like Iron Golem enough. So I'd put Throne Watcher and Defender right there. Solid enough. Velstadt, the Royal Egg, is actually one of my more favorite bosses in Dark Souls 2. Very solid fight against just a big armored knight. I'll put him in A tier. I think he's a bit better than Old Dragon Slayer, but definitely A-. I don't think he's quite as good as Alon. But he's probably next in line to it. Vendrick. Vendrick is Dark Souls 2's Gwyn. Not in the sense that he is the final boss, because he's not. Although Nashandra is his wife, I think. If I only played Dark Souls 2 once, so I don't know the lore that well, but I think that's the correct relationship. he is, by the time you find him, I was expecting him to probably end up being the final boss, like Gwen style. But by the time you find him, probably like 2/3 through the game, he's just this withered old man, wandering around like a crazy person. He's got a massive health bar, but I think if you acquire, I don't know, it's not the crowns, is it? If you get some set of items, I think it's not the crowns. If you get some set of items, you can fight him in a fair fight kind of a way. And when you do that, Taco Bell night. He's fine. He's fine. He's B tier at least. I'd put him like there. Probably a half step above Iron Golem in that solid B tier. He's fine. He's cool lore and solid fight, I guess. Kind of weird, but cool. And that is it for Dark Souls 2. So that was the big chunk of bosses to go through. Dark Souls 3 is the smallest pool of bosses, so that'll be pretty quick. And I know them more, so I'll rank them with a little bit more decisiveness. But that was we had our Dark Souls 1 checkpoint. Here's our checkpoint past Dark Souls 2. We added 2 bosses to S tier with Burnt Ivory King and Dark Lurker. We added 5 bosses to A tier with Fume Knight, Sin, Ancient Dragon, Sirlon, and Velstadt. Honestly, these 2 might be able to be bumped up to S tier as well. If we're talking about the cream of the crop of Dark Souls bosses, I should bump them up there. And then we added a whole lot to B and C. D tier, we had these 3 bosses, and we had a boss join the F tier with Aldia, although not quite as bad as Bed of Chaos. On to Dark Souls 3, which I usually say Dark Souls 3 has the highest quality across the board of bosses in the trilogy. Will that actually live up to the test? Now that I'm looking at it, we'll see. I think the average Dark Souls 3 boss will be a B tier boss, whereas in the other games, at least for Dark Souls 2, it was a C tier boss. So we'll see how it goes. Abyss Watchers. Right off the bat, Abyss Watchers is one of my favorite bosses in Dark Souls 3. It is certainly top of A tier, but the more I play it, the less I'm amazed by it. When I first beat Dark Souls 3, Abyss Watchers was easily a top 3 boss for me. Now I think it probably falls to like the 5th favorite boss, and not quite S tier enough. It's a great fight. I like the lore. They're like servants, followers of Artorias, which is cool. I think it's got to go A tier right there. It's considerably better than Quelaag though, so the fact that they're right together makes me think I should be bumping all these up to S tier. I may do that. We're going to consider it in a little bit. Aldrich, Devourer of Gods. I don't like Aldrich, honestly. It's I like it a little bit more than I used to. It's not quite as frustrating. I've gotten a little bit better at the fight. It is cool because it is in the throwback Norlando section. You fight Aldrich in the same arena that you fight the fabled Ornstein and Smo, except it does not live up, in my opinion, to the coolness and spectacle and iconic nature of that fight. So Aldrich is not going to be nearly that high. And I said most of the average bosses of Dark Souls 3 are probably B tier. I think that's true, but I think Aldrich is a pretty C tier fight. It's solid C tier. It's upper C tier by this scale. Man, if we have the Smelter Demon C+, Aldrich has got to be above those. I'm going to go top of C for now. In fact, now that I'm looking at it, I'm going to move Belfry Gargoyles up. Twin Dragon Riders. Giant Lord. Demon of Song. Yeah. Alright, that's looking better. It's looking better for me. Ancient Wyvern. People are going to get mad. People are going to get upset. Ancient Wyvern is hated on because it's one of those gimmick bosses. But in my opinion, I think Ancient Wyvern is my favorite gimmick boss in the Souls trilogy. Hear me out. First of all, giant classic dragon. I've already explained that I love that. We've got Calamite. We've got Sin. We've got Ancient Dragon. Problem with Ancient Wyvern is it's more like playing Mario Kart than fighting a Dark Souls boss. You run like a couple of laps up around this arena, and then you jump on its head and you kill it in a single attack. So it's not really a boss fight, but it is a very cool spectacle, and that I've got to appreciate. And the final boss, I'm going to pull a way out of left field reference here. The final boss of Super Mario 3D Land for the 3DS. The final boss fight against Bowser is one of my favorite boss fights in video game history. That boss fight is you are running up the tower as Bowser is like chasing you and shooting fire at you, and the castle is crumbling like behind you. I get very similar vibes from the Ancient Wyvern fight. And then similarly, in that Bowser boss fight, you make it to the top, to the end, you hit a button and he falls, just like a classic Bowser fight. Ancient Wyvern gives me very similar vibes, except you're getting chased down by a dragon. And now it's not quite as intense of a chase down because he kind of just stays in the middle and shoots stuff at you. but still cool. All that to say, most people I feel like are going to have Ancient Wyvern in D tier, and I'm going to go crazy and go B tier, because I think it's cool. If you don't like it, leave a comment, get mad. I don't care, sticking by it. In fact, boom, not even bottom of B tier. It's still kind of B to B minus, but it's right there. Hate all you want. Vort of the Boreal Valley. I love Vort. It is the second boss in Dark Souls 3, but it's actually one of my favorite fights in Dark Souls 3. In fact, I'm going to put it A tier. It is not often you get a very early game boss in A tier, but I really like Vort. It'd be kind of hasty for me to move him up further in A tier, but definitely I'm putting him in A tier. I'm sorry about it. Crystal Sage, freaking hate it. It's not F tier, it's D tier. Of the horrible bosses in Dark Souls 3, it's not the worst. It's not as bad as Butterfly, but it's barely better. I don't like Crystal Sage, that's D tier. Curse Rotted Greatwood, one of the only bosses that's probably worse than Crystal Sage. I can't quite go F tier for Curse Rotted Greatwood either. It's got to be D tier, and it's going to be... Call me crazy, I'm going below Centipede Demon. I'm sorry about it. I don't like Curse Rotted Greatwood. Dancer of the Boreal Valley. Popsicle Dog. Dancer of the Boreal Valley. Kind of like Butterfly. Now, not most people will say Dancer is the easiest boss of Dark Souls 3. I think very few people would say that. But I know at least a couple of people who have told me that it was their easiest boss. And what do you know? Similar fashion to Butterfly, the boss that killed me the most in Dark Souls 3 was a boss that not nearly as many people happen to struggle on. Dancer of the Boreal Valley. I'm in the midst of working on Dark Souls 3 Deathless, and in my recent PB, one of the 3 bosses that killed me was Dancer. What do you know? But it's a very solid fight. I really like Dancer. The longer I play the game, the more I like it. It's a very solid boss fight. It's one of those average, quote-unquote, Dark Souls 3 boss fights, which to me, Dark Souls 3 average bosses are B tier, not a C tier. It's way better than Wyvern. In fact, I'm going to go all the way up, right under Guardian Dragon. It's a B+ boss fight by these standards. It's very solid. I feel like we might have to do a little bit of reshuffling as far as cycling some stuff up and down in these tiers, but maybe not. B and C should be the most filled out, so it makes sense that they're kind of the most filled out. Deacons of the Deep. Probably the worst boss fight in Dark Souls 3. It is not as bad as Bed of Chaos or Aldia, but it is certainly F tier. It is literally enemy spam the boss. The boss fight is literally against like 30 mages at once. One of them at a time will have the boss health bar. It'll glow red so you can at least identify what it is. But you have to just like evade all the other, you know, sorcerer enemies shooting fireballs at you. Which granted, they don't all aggro simultaneously, so it's not quite hell. But it's pretty close to it. So you're evading all the enemy spam, trying to get to the one that actually takes boss damage. Kill it till it's dead, then the red light will appear on a different one. Do that till the boss is halfway dead. Then the actual Deacon, who's the boss for the second half of the fight, summons with even more enemy spam, and now all the enemies have more health and do more damage, and it's all bullcrap. It's not a boss fight, it's literally just a 1v30, and it's freaking stupid. It's not even that difficult. It's a 1v30 that sounds horrible, but it's not even that difficult. It's just stupid and annoying and gimmicky, and I hate it, and it's F tier, but it's not as bad as Aldia or Bed of Chaos because it's not as difficult. Old Demon King. Old Demon King resides in what is Dark Souls 1's like Demon Ruins area, and its boss room is filled with a bunch of corpses of the Capra demons, Asylum demons, or I guess Stray demons, and Tourist demons from Dark Souls 1. So that's really cool. It's a solid fight. It's definitely B tier, nothing better than that, nothing crazy, but it's a very cool arena, and I think a very solid boss fight. I would go a step above Nito. Very solid B tier boss. Very solid B tier boss. You killed Demon King in your first try. Nice. Demon Princes. On my recent... I've only played through the DLC of Dark Souls 3 twice. And weirdly enough, in my second playthrough of the Dark Souls 3 DLC, of that whole playthrough, start of the game to the end of the DLC and the end of the game, the boss that I struggled most on in that whole playthrough, randomly enough, was the Demon Princes. That being said, very freaking cool fight. It's a huge arena. I think someone said it's meant to be like the Dark Souls 1 Firelink Shrine location, which doesn't really make sense to me, but I guess it's cool if that's true. I don't know if that's true for sure. I think the like evidence for that is like some of the broken like building pieces there are the same ones from Firelink Shrine Dark Souls 1. So I guess that is oh no, it's definitely accurate because you proceed through that area by going down the same way that Frampt comes up from. But it's a solid fight. Do I want to go? By the way, I'm gonna drop 4 kings. I'm gonna drop 4 kings to here under Dancer. Demon Princes. Do I want to go quite A tier? I'll go A minus. They're much more difficult and probably a better boss than Vort. I do prefer Vort a little bit just for myself, but I'll go A minus for Demon Princes. Next up is Dragon Slayer Armor, another very solid boss fight in Dark Souls 3. It's one of the average, but, you know, a little bit above average Dark Souls 3 bosses. I don't think it cracks A tier. I wouldn't be mad at someone if they put it above A tier, but it's B tier. Its second stage is really annoying, because in the second stage, you have these giant butterfly things out of the arena that you can't fight, shooting projectiles at you. Nothing's more annoying than you're fighting a boss and off screen you're getting projectiles thrown at you. So that kind of sucks, but it's a very cool boss. Pretty cool looking arena. Very solid B tier. I'd put him right there, right above 4 Kings. I'm fine with that. I might do like that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to put 4 Kings right above. But Dragon Slayer, good, better than Sanctuary. Very solid B+ boss fight. We're getting close to the end here. Champions, Grave Tenders, and the Grave Tenders Great Wolf. This is essentially Sif without a sword, plus some random dude. It's a pretty bad fight. It's not great. It's not great. Looking at the layout of the Dark Souls 2 bosses that I have in C tier, I might have to move stuff down because it's definitely better, but I think of this as a D tier fight. You struggle the most with this fight. Everyone experiences this game differently, man, I'm telling you. I am going to go ahead and move some stuff. I'm going to do that and shuffle down the bottom of C tier to D tier. It's going to be in the same order, but we're going to spread this out a little bit, and we'll let that be the bottom of C tier for now, at least. Looking pretty good. Half-Light Spear of the Church. This boss has, like, online functionality where the boss fight can be, like, a PvP player. Some people think that's cool. I think that's kind of... I don't really care for it, honestly. And then if you fight the NPC, or yeah, just the normal AI version of the boss, if you don't do the online version, it's just a fight against a player type character. And it's really fast and it has magic and projectiles and it's pretty annoying. It's not insanely difficult, it's just kind of annoying. It's D tier, I'm sorry. I'm going right there. Sorry about it. That makes it the 3rd worst boss in Dark Souls 3. I definitely would have thought it was bottom 4. I think at one point I called it my least favorite boss, but I definitely think Deacons is worse. It's debatable between it and Curse Rotted, probably. I played as the boss and killed people. That's pretty cool. I never have done that, so maybe that's cool. Wolnir. Wolnir is another boss in Dark Souls 3 that isn't extremely loved, but I really like it. It gives off Nito vibes in the sense it's a giant skeleton of death in the darkness. It's not great. B tier would honestly be kind of generous. It is like, as a boss fight, worse than Aldrich, so I probably can't go B tier. So it's going to be C tier, and I'm going to go right above Demon of Song. That feels right. In my loins, that feels good. Hold on. I said that the average Dark Souls 3 boss is B tier, not C tier. So far, we've got 4 in B, 3 in C. We'll see what ends up happening. I say that, I know a lot of these are about to be solid. Eudex Gundyr and Champion Gundyr. Eudex Gundyr is probably my favorite tutorial boss in the trilogy. It's gotta be. Dark Souls 2 doesn't really have a tutorial boss. So if we're talking about just the trilogy, it's Asylum Demon or Eudex Gundyr. Eudex Gundyr is a better fight. I do not think it nearly as well encapsulates the lesson that the Dark Souls 1 tutorial teaches you, but it's a much better fight, and I can't really say otherwise. honestly, it's more fun to fight than Dragon Slayer. It'd be kind of generous to put it above that. So I'm going to put this B tier below Dragon Slayer for now. There's another average Dark Souls 3 boss being B tier. Then we got Champion Gunder, which is not quite a copy and paste boss because he has a bit different of a moveset. Hello there, Gamer Knight. He has a bit different of a moveset. He's a mid-late game boss, and he's cool. He's actually one of my favorite Dark Souls 3 bosses. He is definitely A tier. It's Eudix, except he's younger, because it's back in time. He's bigger, badder, faster, cooler moveset. Fight him in the darkness. Same arena, though, but freaking cool. I really like Champion Gunder. In fact, he's probably like 5th or 6th favorite boss for me in Dark Souls 3. Maybe, now that I say that. We haven't gotten to the best Dark Souls 3 bosses yet. Cool beans. I'm putting Gunder definitely below Abyss Watchers, but above Quelaag. So yeah, very solid A+ boss fight for me. Champion Gunder. Really like it. Twin Princes. This is a boss that I know quite a lot of people actually like quite a bit. And I don't. I just learned the cheese with it. The cheese against them where you like are up against the fog gate. And it's like kind of a fun rhythm game at that point. But it's... It's definitely B tier. It's not below B tier. So it's another one of those average Dark Souls 3 bosses. I'd have it above Old Demon King. Honestly, though, I kind of want to put it right there. B, like average B boss. I'm going to put it as an average B boss. It's still an average Dark Souls 3 boss in B tier, but it's an average B boss. I know a lot of people like it and might have it in A tier or something, but it's not my thing. Now we are getting to the good stuff, the cream of the crop. This boss, my first playthrough of Dark Souls 3, I said was my favorite boss in the game. It's certainly not now, but it's, I think, easily number 3. Dark Eater Midir. I've said it once, I've said it again, I've said it a million times, and I'll continue to say it. I am a sucker for classic, epic, tough dragon boss fights, and Dark Souls 3's Dark Eater Midir is the epitome of that. He has the most ginormous health pool in the entire game. It is a long, sizable fight, but to me that just makes it feel more epic. His arena's cool, the way you get him to that arena is cool, he looks freaking awesome. Not only does he spit fire like a classic dragon, but he also has freaking awesome magic, darkness fireballs that he shoots. He's just cool, and he's ginormous, and he's awesome. He is Dark Eater Midir, and he is not only S tier, I'm putting him above Orange Sea and Smell. He's that cool. Isn't Yorm the biggest? Well, technically yes, but Yorm's a gimmick fight that you kill in 5 hits. So, technically his number is biggest, but I don't count that because that's not the intended way to fight him. I could see how some might say he is objectively better than Calamite with just the newness of the mechanics and the polish of Dark Souls 3 compared to Dark Souls 1. But Calamite feels a lot more like a balanced, solid fight, in my personal opinion. If you disagree, that's fine. Midir's health bar makes the fight really long, like almost tediously long. I enjoy it, but a lot of people are turned off by Midir because the fight is just really long for no other reason than he has such a huge health bar. So once you've kind of learned his attacks, it's just a matter of how long do you have the stamina to, fight him. So for that reason, I'm going to keep him below Calamite. But if people had him above Calamite, I wouldn't be mad. But I'm going to keep him below because Calamite feels a little bit more balanced. Yorm is taller, but Midir is bigger. If we're talking about size, yeah, fair enough. Let's get to the good stuff. Nameless King. I go back and forth on my favorite boss of Dark Souls 3. There was a time I said Midir. Very quickly after that first playthrough, I realized it's not Midir, it's Nameless King. Oh, it's so tough to put anything above Artorias and Calamite because they are my S tier of the S tier from my favorite Dark Souls game, Dark Souls 1. But bro, Nameless King is so good. I think Nameless King has my favorite boss arena of any boss. I almost want to say in video games. He has one of the best boss arenas. A giant storm. You're on like a storm cloud. There's lightning. There's rain. everywhere. His entrance, he flies in atop a freaking dragon from the sky. That dragon shoots lightning at you. He shoots lightning at you. The dragon breathes fire. You kill the dragon. He comes off the dragon. Then you 1v1 him. He's the son of Gwen, the freaking final boss of the first game. Lore-wise, S tier. Fight-wise, S tier. Presentation, look, arena, S tier. It's all perfect. And he's challenging, which is the one knock I gave Artorias. Nameless King is above Artorias. Nameless King is above Black Dragon Calamite. It is a better boss. Is a better boss. The best boss. We have ranked all of these bosses so far. We only have 6 to go, but of all these bosses we have ranked, the best one so far is the Nameless King. Just has to be. Let's finish out Dark Souls 3. Osiris the Consumed King. Coming back down from the Cloud 9 stratosphere of Nameless King. Osiris is another kind of dragon boss. Not exactly, though. He's kind of a king that kind of like Frankenstein into a dragon or something. I get a little bit confused in the lore. He's another one of those solid B tier average Dark Souls 3 bosses. I enjoy it more than Twin Princes. I probably wouldn't go higher than that though. They're kind of right about the same for me. Now all the rest. Okay, I'm going to talk about Yorm first because he's the worst of the remaining to list. Yorm is one of the coolest looking boss fights. Lore-wise, very cool. He's like best friends with Sigurd. That whole questline and secret boss fight with a companion if you do the questline. Awesome. I'm really turned off by the gimmickness of Yorm's fight. You go in there to fight this giant, and he looks awesome, but he's yes, doable. People are crazy masochists, and they will do it. But he's not intended to be fought unless you pick up a specific weapon, which it is in his arena. But you have to think after dying or mid-fight to go put that weapon on. Then, even if you know exactly what you need to do, I got to pick up this weapon and use its special move to actually deal damage. It's like not ever told you how you do the move. You have to charge up using L2, which is the parry button. While holding the sword, you have to hold L2 for like 10 whole seconds until it flashes a light. Then you have to let go, press L2, then R2 to do the like laser beam move, and that's the only way to intendedly deal damage to Yorm. And that super specific unexplained gimmick alone really freaking turns me off of the boss fight, man. I really like his lore. I think he's got solid, A grade lore. I think he's got an S tier design, looks awesome, his arena's cool, but that gimmick that is unexplained that you have to perform to fight him unless you're a masochist that wants to literally poke at him for an hour and a half. It really takes away from the boss fight for me. And then once you know the intended method, it's not even really a boss fight. It's just get enough space to charge up for 10 seconds and then stun him and do a third of his health. It's pretty lame. It sucks because if he was just a normal boss fight with everything else, he'd be either top of B or A tier. But he's got to be a C tier boss for me. I'm sorry. I like him enough, but look, this giant lord, that's a normal giant fight. It's better. It's just better. I'm going to go like right here for Yorm. Mid C tier. I want you to be better, Yorm. You're so cool. You're even a part of that freaking iconic Dark Souls 3 meme with the giant Yorm versus the Dark Souls player and the meme. It's so good. I love everything about Yorm except the actual boss fight, which for a boss is pretty important. So I hate that for you. But we are done talking about anything that is not great, because every boss we have left to talk about is some of the best that the Dark Souls franchise has to offer, so let's just get right on into it. First up, we've got Pontiff Sullivan. In my mind, he's kind of like the Ornstein and Smough of Dark Souls 3. Even though I think he's technically, a little bit more than halfway through the game, honestly. Maybe not. He feels like the halfway point in the game. If you do the DLC, I can definitely feel that way. Now that I've been running Dark Souls 3 more, after him, the game is really not that long if you're just doing the base game and not doing any extra bosses. But he's pretty much the halfway point of the game. He's in this grand looking hall at the end of this really cool city. So by that sense, he feels like Dark Souls 3's Ornstein and Smough. That being said, he's not quite as iconic and good as that. But a very fun fact. Here's a little Pontiff Sullivan story. My very first interaction ever with the Dark Souls franchise in any way was Pontiff Sullivan. I had never heard of Dark Souls, and I didn't even really watch or learn anything about it at this time. But of all people, I saw a clip of PewDiePie fighting Pontiff Sullivan. That was the first thing I ever saw about Dark Souls. The franchise from Software, any other games, the first thing I ever saw was a clip of PewDiePie fighting Pontiff Sullivan from like 2016 when the game came out. It was the most random thing ever. But when I entered the Pontiff Sullivan boss arena, well into my Dark Souls journey, I was like, wait a second, I've seen this guy. I've seen PewDiePie fight this guy. I had no idea it was even from this game. So that's just funny. But it is a great boss fight. It is a great boss fight. I think I do prefer Gunder, but it's better than Quelaag. It's an A-tier boss fight. Very cool. He wields these two glowy magic swords. He's awesome. He's tough. He is one of the hardest bosses in Dark Souls 3. In my opinion, I mean, if we're not including DLC, I think he's a top 3 most difficult base game boss. But even with DLC, he's probably top 5, 6 maybe, 7. He's more difficult than these two. He's not as difficult as Madir King, or Nameless King, but he's more difficult than Gunder and Abyss Watchers. He's tough. He's the boss that killed me. No. The boss that killed me the most in Dark Souls 3 was Dancer, but second most I think was Pontiff Sullivan. Moving on, and we're getting crazy. Sister Frieda. She is a 3-phase boss fight. I mentioned not many boss fights are triple bosses. Not many boss fights have 3 legitimate phases. Frieda is one of them, and she is awesome. She is freaking hard. A lot of people's most difficult Dark Souls 3 boss. There was a time I'd probably say she was the most difficult boss in Dark Souls 3. I died to her, I think, the 3rd most times, behind number 1 being Dancer, LOL, and number 2 being Pontiff Sullivan. I think my next most died to boss in my first playthrough of Dark Souls 3 was Sister Frieda, but she's freaking awesome. She is a cool fight. I gotta go S tier, but I am gonna go probably bottom of S tier under Manus, but she is freaking cool. She's a great fight. Slave Knight Gale. I hate this because I feel like I often have to act like a hater for Gale. I have to act like I'm a hater of Gale. Because he is most people's number 1 best Dark Souls boss. And that is a little bit crazy to me. He is a great boss fight. I really like him. Great boss fight. But if you look on like any poll, like a YouTube poll, or like a lot of people's, top 10 best Dark Souls bosses, more often than not, the number 1 is going to be Slave Knight Gale. And I get he's the final boss of the last DLC of Dark Souls 3, so he's kind of like the final boss of a lot of people's Dark Souls 3 experience. And he's a great fight. His moveset is cool and fun to learn how to fight against. He's got a second phase where he shoots all this red lightning, and it's cool, but it is very far from the best Dark Souls boss, in my opinion. Like, objectively, he's probably a better fight than these. It's hard to argue him above anything I have above him right here. A lot of people have him above Madir. I'm not mad at that. I'm not mad if you have him above like Artorias or even Calamite. But for me personally, I like him. That's the thing, is I feel like I have to sound like a hater for Gale when I genuinely really like him. It's just because he's so high from everybody, like everyone else has him so high, I feel like I have to bump him down a little bit. I'm going to put Gale above Dark Lurker, below Ivory King, right here. Between the two S-tier Dark Souls 2 bosses, I'm going to put Gale right here. And now that I'm thinking about it and looking at it, I do want to bump Fume and Sin to S-tier. They're going to be bottom of S-tier, certainly. But when we're talking about the S-tiers, like, these are the reason you want to play the Dark Souls games. Dark Souls is known for its bosses, and the reason you're going to play the Dark Souls games is because of the boss fights. That's the experience. I think Fume Knight and Sin are deserving of being in that group of, this is the peak of this franchise. So for that reason, oh my gosh, and now I almost want to bump Abyss Watchers up. Oh, we might get crazy. Okay, I said Fume and Sin are kind of on the same level. I'm going to bump Sin down to very tip top of the A++ and let Fume be the bottom of S. I think they're right there, but Fume's a half step higher better. That's where I'm going to have it for now. And finally, we have one more boss to rank. And I've just got to do it. the number one boss of Dark Souls 3, the number one boss of the Dark Souls trilogy, I think has to be Soul of Cinder. It just checks every freaking box. It is a challenge, but not too frustrating. It is cool. It's the freaking classic Dark Souls knight, but he's covered in flame. He is the final boss of the main game of Dark Souls 3, and he has maybe the coolest lore of any boss. Only in the sense of he is a combination, he is the amalgamation of those who have linked the fire in the past. Essentially what that means is he is the final boss of Dark Souls 3, but he is the combination of Gwyn, the final boss from Dark Souls 1, and your player character from Dark Souls 1. The final boss of Dark Souls 3 is essentially your player character from the very first Dark Souls combined with the final boss of that game. And that is reflected in his moveset. He has Gwyn's moveset, including his lightning spears that Gwyn doesn't even use in Dark Souls 1's boss fight. And he has the moveset of pretty much anything you could do with your Dark Souls 1 character. He can do the ninja flips. He can do all the sorceries. He can do a spear, a sword, and he can change at will to any of these movesets. I think he has, if not the most, one of the absolute most diverse movesets and fighting styles of any boss in any video game ever. He is so cool. He's so awesome. I have debated a lot on my favorite boss in Dark Souls 3. I debate a lot between, for a while it was Nameless King or Midir, and I had Cinder around the 3 or 4 range, but I don't know what I was thinking after my first playthrough. I think the reason I had him a little bit lower after the first playthrough is that I did all the optional bosses and fought him last, so he was a little bit too easy, but definitely still more challenging than Gwyn from Dark Souls 1. He was a little bit too easy for what I thought the final boss of Dark Souls 3 should be, but now, when I fight him in a casual, challenge run, where I don't do the extra bosses, I don't do the DLCs, without all that extra XP from fighting, a dozen plus bosses, without all that extra XP, he is easily the most challenging boss fight of the base game of Dark Souls 3, in my opinion. Like I said, Nameless King maybe is a little bit tougher, but when you don't go all the way out to do the optional areas and optional bosses and to get all the extra XP, Soul of Cinder and a normal 13 boss playthrough of Dark Souls 3 is easily the toughest, and he's the coolest, and his lore is amazing, and just who he is amazing. And because of that, I think he's got to be the number one boss. So there you have it, a complete tier list of the Dark Souls trilogy's bosses. As is to be expected, B tier and C tier fill out a lot. Our F tier bosses, the worst of the worst. Bed of Chaos. I love how each game has their one horrible boss. Bed of Chaos, I think, is the worst boss in video game history. Aldea, I think, is shortly behind. Deacons isn't quite as offensive, but it still sucks. The D tier bosses are all pretty bad, although some of them I kind of like a little bit on their own, kind of like a Pinwheel or a Capra Demon if he didn't have the arena with the dogs. Capra on his own I like. Ceaseless I like, lore-wise and stuff, but it's a nothing burger of a boss. Then we go up to A tier, where we got Demon Princes, Vort of the Boreal Valley, Velstadt, Surlon, Ancient Dragon, Bell Gargoyles, Sif, Quelaag, all very solid A tier bosses, including Pontiff, Champion Gunder, Abyss Watchers, and Sin are right on the line between A tier and S tier. They are both so good, and I think a notable half step above the rest of A tier. But Abyss Watchers and Sin, I don't think quite break that threshold for the iconic S-tier Dark Souls bosses. But those iconic S-tier Dark Souls bosses, I believe, are Fume Knight, Sister Frieda, Manus, Dark Lurker, Slave Knight Gale, the Burnt Ivory King, everyone's favorite combo, Pikachu and Snorlax, Kobe and Shaq, Ornstein and Smo. Then you've got Dark Eater Midir, the big, bad, menacing darkness dragon, Artorias the Abyss Walker, Black Dragon Calamite, and the top two, Nameless King and the Soul of Cinder. Ladies and gentlemen, that is your official stamped Kyrogus Dark Souls Trilogy all bosses tier list. Let me know what you thought. Do you think my picks are stupid? Do you think they're good? Which was the most egregious pick? I think I can pick out a couple of them that I know are not popular opinions. What do you think was my best, most accurate take? Or what's something that, is probably not a popular take, but is one that you agree with that I happen to make? Not a lot of people like, the freaking Ancient Dragon boss fight. Are you the one person out there that agrees it's fun? I want to know. let me know. But yeah, there you go. I'm pretty happy with this list, and that was a mouthful. And I think, golly, how long did it take us to do that? Almost an hour and a half or something. It's a pretty sizable tier list, but tons of fun. One of the most I've enjoyed doing a tier list in a long time. I'm sure if I thought super long and hard about it and combed through it a bunch, I'd change quite a bit, you know, in little changes here and there. But yeah, for the most part, this is where I would rank all the Dark Souls Trilogy bosses. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Kyrogus. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out. See ya.